So this video is about testing third-party indicators for compatibility with BloodHound. Most indicators work perfectly fine with BloodHound, about 95% or so, but a few don't, and we'll talk about how to test for compatibility and why some don't work with BloodHound. There's usually a good reason. So we have a couple of indicators on here just for this example. These come with NinjaTrader, but it really doesn't matter. So you have the Don-Chan channel, which has 3 plot lines, and the BOP, which fluctuates from above 0 to below 0. So I brought up BloodHound by clicking the button at the top. If you don't know that yet, I would probably say start with the Getting Started videos and then come back here. So let's focus on one indicator first. So there's a few different ways to test for compatibility depending on the style of the indicator. For a simple line-based indicator like the Don-Chan channel, I like to use the Inflection Solver. Because it allows us to look for inflection points. So we expect, when I connect this and get it all set up for the Don-Chan channel, I expect this point right here where it goes from flat to down or from down to up, I expect there to be signals because that's an inflection point. It goes down, and then as soon as it turns up on that bar, we're going to get a long signal, and over here, probably a short signal as long as this is not technically going down already. If it truly is flat or up, then this is an inflection point. So let's set this up. For the input under indicator, we'll tell it to look at the Don-Chan channel. We can type the search here, Don-Chan channel. Really important is to make sure that you set all your parameters to match what is on the chart. So if right now I just have the Don-Chan set to the default period of 14, but you can really confuse yourself if you don't pay attention to that, because BloodHound is not reading what indicator is on your chart. You are adding a new indicator internally in BloodHound, and so you need to tell it to what settings match what you're seeing on the chart. Okay, so we'll leave that. Now it's a good idea to look at one plot or one item at a time. It's really important because if you try to do more than one at a time, you can confuse yourself pretty easily. So the first one, let's check out the upper line. That's this upper blue line here. So we'll check both long and short. There are cases where you would have different checkboxes here, but not for testing. You want to test one and only one at a time. So upper, check both, click OK, and we'll connect it. So if it's working properly, then the signals should match our expectation, which is inflection points. Now you'll notice that the signal here is offset from where the inflection appears to be. Well, that's because, and you can see by clicking on the line itself, you can see that the plot itself, right, the plot point is down here because that's where the bar was. Right? So you have one bar closes and the next bar then closes over here, and that is where the plot points appear. Right? So just because it visually looks like it inflected up here, didn't actually. This is just the line filling in the points between the plot points on the bars. Right? So this is behaving the way we expect, because from one bar to the next it inflected down, and over here from one bar to the next it inflected up, down, and so on. Your indicator may behave a little different, but this is just one of several ways to test this. And if you're suspicious that your indicator may not be fully compatible, it never hurts to test all the different plots, both checkboxes for the mean, that's the middle line, and we'll click OK. And now our signals will be based on the middle line, and you want to look at several signals to make sure that there are no sort of false positives or false negatives. Here you may think, oh, well, why did I not get a signal here? Well, that's because it went up to down here, and that's where the inflection was, and from here forward it continued to go down or flat, right? It never actually inflected back up. And so this is not actually an inflection point right here. So the signals are working as expected. Another way that may be useful, depending on the indicator, is to use the slope solver. So if we go into the solvers and find slope, this is less commonly useful, but I tend to like it for line-looking indicators like the Dongchan, like the moving average, things like that, like the MACD. So we'll do Dongchan and make sure the period matches. We'll do upper again, just to stay on that theme and connect it. And so here it's showing, it's giving you a signal based on the slope direction, right? So from one bar to the next, did it slope down or up? If it's flat, then it will have no signal. So from this bar to this bar, there was no change. So from there to there, there was no change. But from here to here, there was a change down, and so we get a short signal. So that could be a little bit, that can provide a little more nuance or detail in your signals, because it's every bar in which it's going down or up, and you can confirm that. Now, in a situation like this, if you want to get more nuanced with it, I recommend looking at the data box. This is very helpful for looking at the actual plot values. So if we right-click on the chart and go Show Data Box, if you haven't seen this before, what this does is wherever the mouse is, so over this bar right here, the mouse is over that bar, and so all the values in the data box are for all the indicators and the price underneath the mouse for that bar. So if you're looking to really confirm the values from one bar to the next, or if you're comparing two plot lines to each other, we'll talk about that in a second, you can look at their values and compare them yourself down to the hundredth of the integer. So that can be helpful if you want to really dive deep or if the difference is subtle. So for example, let's say you want to confirm that yes, this whole range right here is in fact flat, right? So as you move your mouse throughout that range, does the upper line, that's this line right here, so it says 83 or 83 right now, but if I move the mouse back over there, it now says 96.02. So as I move the mouse throughout that whole range, does that 96.02 change? No. It only changes once we get to where the signal is, because that's when the price or the value changed, and so finally we get a slope of some kind. But throughout that whole range, it was flat, and so that's why the slope solver is not producing any signals. Let's take an example like this oscillator, that a really good way to quickly confirm that BloodHound is reading it is using a fixed value comparison. And fixed value comparisons are useful in a lot of different places for testing indicators. So let's do a comparison solver. And in a comparison solver, as you probably know, you have two inputs, input A and input B. In this case, we're going to compare the value of the oscillator to 0. So we can get a quick glance and see, is BloodHound seeing when it switches from above or below 0. That's a quick way to see if it's reading it right. So for input A, that's always going to be our indicator. So the BOP, double click that. Again, make sure that the parameters are the same and your plots are selected properly, and click OK. And for input B, we'll change it to a fixed value, and in this case, we're just looking for it to jump up and down around the 0 line. So when I connect this, we're expecting the signals to change only when it switches sides from below 0 to above 0. So here it's all short because it's all below 0. And by the way, another way to see the data box is to hold your middle mouse button. So if you're not on a laptop or something and you have an actual computer mouse, you can press the scroll wheel as if it were a button, because it is a button. So you press it down and hold it, and as you move the mouse, it changes, it shows the values under the mouse. Same thing up here. If I do it up here, now we can see the prices, values, and the Dongchan up there. So here it's all negative, 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 and then as soon as the BOP goes above 0, the fixed value comparison swaps the signal to long. Okay, so that's another quick and dirty way to confirm that it's reading it properly. Now, all we know from this is that it's reading that it's going above or below 0, but that basically tells us that it's reading the right value because it knows exactly when it switches. So that's a quick way. Now, a fixed value comparison like this is also useful when you have an indicator that produces a specific output. Now, I couldn't think of an indicator that I have on my system that does this for this example, but basically, if you have an indicator that outputs an exact value of 1 or an exact value of -1, so for like a signal indicator, it either has no output or an output of 1, right? And when there's an output of 1, I want a signal, right? You can do that exactly like this with the comparison solver, and often a fixed value of 0 is enough for that, because for those signal indicators, oftentimes if it's 0, if your indicator is outputting either nothing or a value of 0, then you don't want a signal. And only when it is above 0, like a value of 1, then you get a long signal, and so on. If you need to target a specific value, like I want to know when my indicator is exactly a value of 1 and not a value of 2, then probably the easiest way to do that is with the threshold solver. Because in the threshold solver rules, I'm not going to connect this right now because I don't have a good indicator for this, but in the output settings, if we go in here, the threshold solver allows us to specify an exact value. So right here, we're saying for a long signal, if the SMA, in this case, whatever your indicator is, we can change this to equals. So we can say, if my indicator equals exactly 1, then give me a long output. Okay, and if you're only looking for one thing, you can set the short output to 0, meaning don't do anything for shorts. Just look at this line. Is my indicator exactly a value of 1? Then give me an output. And you can even go a step further and use the short to say, if my indicator is equal to exactly 2, then give me a short output. 1 is the full short signal, if that makes sense. So 100% long signal, 100% short signal. And so this allows you to test an indicator with multiple different possible values and see what you're getting there, rather than just, is it above 0 or is it below, 0? That may not be nuanced enough for your indicator. So sorry I didn't have an indicator handy that would allow us to demonstrate that, but hopefully you understand the purpose of that. Now, there are some cases where your indicator will not show up in this list at all, right? So if you're looking in this list, maybe not even search, but like you're scrolling down, you simply cannot find it anywhere. It might be under a folder. If it's not showing up in this list, then it simply is not compatible with BloodHound for one reason or another. Now, why would it not be compatible at all, right? So you notice that so far we've only talked about indicators that produce plots, plot points that are output on the chart and have a value, a data point that we can grab onto. There are also some indicators that create hidden plots. We call them DataSeries. And so they would show up instead of being labeled as a plot, they would be labeled as a data series. Those are also supported by BloodHound. But basically, the indicator needs to be providing a piece of data that we can grab onto, an actual value. So an example of one that does not do that is, let's say you have a third-party indicator and all it does is draw like an arrow. Let's see, chart marker, arrow down. Okay, so let's say you have an indicator and all it does is draw an arrow whenever something, some value lines up, and it says, okay, you want to buy here or something like that. If all it's doing is drawing an arrow, we cannot read that. BloodHound cannot read it. NinjaTrader, apparently NinjaTrader 8 has made some way to read some drawing objects, but traditionally and for years and years, that wasn't possible at all. So BloodHound does not support, and Blackbird, by the way, all of these things apply to our other product, Blackbird, as well. But BloodHound cannot read drawing objects. But in many cases, especially if the indicator was written by someone who has a lot of experience coding indicators, there's a good chance that they'll provide a data series value to go with that. So when the arrow appears, then it will also have a hidden value, a hidden data series, plot value basically, that is, let's say -1 if it's a red arrow and +1 if it's a green arrow, or something like that, some piece of data that can be grabbed onto. And oftentimes indicators will do that because that's also necessary for NinjaTrader's own strategy builder. So if you want to create your own NinjaTrader strategies in their strategy builder, you need to have a value to grab onto as well. It also cannot read drawing objects. And so oftentimes they'll make that available in some way. So go look for that, and you may just see an indicator where all it has is several data series values, and hopefully the coder of that indicator gave it a name that is descriptive enough, like red arrow or down arrow, or buy, sell short or something like that, that may tip you off to the fact that, oh, okay, this data series object is tied to the arrows. So whenever the red arrow appears, I'm expecting it to be maybe a -1 or something like that. So you'll have to do a little bit of testing and some interpretation, unless the indicator developer provides that information to you. You can always reach out to them and say, hey, I'm trying to use this with a third-party tool. Is there, are you producing an output with the red arrow or something like that? So I hope that makes sense. It can, in cases like this, it can be a little tricky to test it, but that's the method of testing, is just look for some output and compare it to something like, is it below 0? Then we can grab onto that. So if you get stuck or you need further advice on how to test indicators, you are welcome to email us and we can give some advice. But the concepts in this video cover pretty much all of it. But let us know if anything is missing in your opinion, and we can go from there. Oh, and one other reason why an indicator is not compatible with BloodHound would be if the indicator does backpainting. So let's imagine that we have an indicator that produces a red arrow on a bar. So let's say this is the current bar right here, this final bar. And then the bar closes, and the market moves forward, and so forth. And then after that bar has already closed, your indicator then changes its output and produces some plot value on this bar, right? And so it's going back in time and adjusting the output of the indicator after the bar has already closed. That's called backpainting. So if your indicator does backpainting, where it adjusts historical bars after the price has already closed, then in most cases, BloodHound will not be able to read its outputs at all, or your signals may be unreliable. Either they may not show up at all, or they'll only show up if you refresh the chart, because all those past bars are building, and so BloodHound can then produce the signals, but it may not work on live bars. right? So backpainting is a fairly rare practice. You probably won't run into that very much. But if you do, then it may simply not work with BloodHound. So, because BloodHound is really designed to, if you get a signal on a historical bar, then in most cases you can expect that signal to have happened if it were a live bar, right? We don't want to create tools that fool you into thinking that a signal would have been there, but then you go and try and do things live and it doesn't work, right? And backpainting kind of causes that misinterpretation. There are legitimate use cases for backpainting, but not for BloodHound. So anyway, this video is long enough. Get started on testing your indicators, and if you feel like there's anything missing or anything else you need help with, just let us know. Thank you.